Welcome to the Region Free Gamers Podcast, Episode 2. That's right, Axel. Today, we're talking about you.
Hello there, folks, and welcome back for the first time to the Region Free Gamers Podcast, the podcast that is fluent in gaming. My name is Ozzy, and I will be your host for today. And with me today are my distinguished co-hosts. So we have Arnie.
Hey guys, what's going on?
And we also have Masa from Finland.
Hello, it's me, Masa.
And finally, we have Paul down in the frigid regions of Canada.
Yeah, still frigid today. My name's Paul. I like video games.
Well, we all like video games, and before we get underway, we really want to thank everyone that tuned into our first episode. If you gave us some feedback or spread the word about our podcast, trust us, it was very much appreciated. We were all feverishly waiting for anyone to listen to the podcast and to the episode and see what they thought. So it's just, if you have any comments and any feedback, it's always welcome. It's always very appreciated. We're still trying to figure this out, as you can probably tell. So anything you can tell us to get better, it's very, very welcome. And we're really excited for today's episode because now that we have truly got an introductions out of the way, which is always sort of a little bit awkward, we can really kick back and do a deep dive on what we love most, which is games, both old and new. And perhaps you were able to guess by the title of this episode, but today we're going way back to the golden days of the 1990s, in a time when Milli Vanilli was a thing and Marky Mark was more known for his rapping than his acting. And coin-munching arcade machines were the loot boxes of the day. I mean, they took a lot of coins. So we will be talking today about a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of almost every gamer. At least that's what my impression is. And that is the beat-em-up genre, or brawlers if you happen to grow up in the PAL region. And we will be talking about the genre, what made it special, some of our favorite games in the genre, and whether there can ever be a true revival of such genre. We will also be talking about some of the games we are most looking forward to in this rising year of 2018. If it's anything like 2017, God bless our wallets. But before we get into all that, we want to jump into a little segment we like to start with, and that's discussing what games we have been playing lately. So as for me, I have been talking enough, and will therefore cede the way to my esteemed co-hosts. So without further ado, Masa, tell us, what have you been playing lately?
Yeah, there's actually a few games. So ever since the last episode, I finished Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and since then, there's a couple of games that I've been really into. There's a few games that I played, like Cinemora EX. It's a game that I recently got. Haven't really played it that much yet, but it does seem like quite a shoot 'em up hidden gem. It's out on both the PS4 and the Switch. But the games that I've really, really enjoyed lately, I actually finally finished my very first Uncharted game, and funnily enough, I started with the latest game, which is The Lost Legacy.
Oh, and how do you like it?
I had a blast. Okay, so it's definitely not like a 10 out of 10 kind of game, but I really enjoyed it.
Did you find that it was difficult or perhaps not optimal starting from the last chapter?
I wouldn't say so, because the Lost Legacy does not actually feature Nathan Drake. The main characters do appear in the previous games, and I have not played the fourth game. I have played Uncharted 3, haven't finished it yet, and I feel like, okay, so yeah, of course, this is like, The Lost Legacy was supposed to be just an add-on, or like a story DLC to Uncharted 4, so it's definitely not like a groundbreaking game. And of course, like, this is coming from someone who didn't play Uncharted 4, but like, compared to Uncharted 3, yeah, it's definitely a big improvement, and I actually enjoyed The Lost Legacy quite a bit more than what I've played like Uncharted 3. Of course, it's like very, very cinematic, and that was to be expected. And yeah, I mean, the biggest difference I would say is the shooting system has been improved at least a little bit since they added this like auto aiming. And I mean, I know that if you are a hardcore Uncharted player, you probably wouldn't use that. But at least for me, I did really like how the shooting worked in Uncharted 3, and that's probably the reason why I haven't finished it yet. But yeah, it feels a lot better in the Lost Legacy.
It's a very self-contained game, and it really serves as a bridge towards whatever it is that Naughty Dog and Sony are going to do with the Uncharted franchise. They're really trying to establish Chloe and Nadine as the future of the franchise, because I'm not going to speak too much about Uncharted 4 because I don't want to spoil it for everyone, but it kind of is really a closing of the book on Nathan Drake. And I think it does it very well. And of course, I don't think Sony is going to let go of the Uncharted franchise. So this kind of really serves as a segue into the future of the franchise. So even if you haven't played any of the other ones, maybe you will miss a few of the callbacks to the original games, but you're not really going to feel like you're being left out in the cold, because you really get to see a side that you haven't seen from these characters in the other games, because they just did not have the starring time. It was pretty much Nathan Drake's show before. So I think it doesn't really hinder you if you start from the last game, because it really just serves as a bridge towards the new breed of Uncharted.
Yeah, and I would say, okay, so I actually bought the game on sale. I paid under 20 euros for it, and like I think it launched at like 40 euros, at least in Europe, and that it's not a very long game. Even I, who's often like really slow when it comes to finishing games, I beat it like under 8 hours. And I would say it was worth the price that I paid for it. And it, like, honestly, like, it's so action-packed that you kind of, like, you do, like, once you finish the game, you do feel like, yeah, I mean, I got my money's worth. I had a blast. It was fun. But yeah, definitely if I had paid 40 euros for it, then I would be a bit like, yeah, that was a bit short for a game that's in the mid-price range.
Well, it also includes the whole multiplayer suite for Uncharted 4. So if you're into that, that's also added value. It doesn't really have a lot of replay value. I mean, you could go back and play to get all the treasures and the like, but it's not a game that really has a lot of replay value. But what I liked about it was the idea that I played it over 2 days, and it was just a quick game to get out of the way, and it was a very compact, condensed experience. So I enjoyed it. Maybe it's just that I played through Uncharted 4 not too long ago. It was last year. It felt like it hit a lot of the same beats as Uncharted 4. But if you haven't played Uncharted 4, then yeah, man. I mean, it's really good. It's really excellent, and the graphics are just amazing. But I think above all, what makes Naughty Dog stand out is really the motion capture and the performance capture. I mean, Claudia Black as Chloe is just amazing. She's really, really great.
Yeah, she is, and like personally, I'm a huge Laura Bailey fanboy, but I gotta say that yeah, it was Claudia Black who really stole the show here. And yeah, when it comes to the graphics, okay, so I'm a Nintendo fanboy, as we established in the previous episode. So I'm not like you, like super realistic and amazing graphics. But yeah, I would say when it comes to console games, that game, I mean, it is probably the best looking console game I've ever seen. It was, yeah, like sometimes I would just have to, like I stopped and then I was like just checking out the environments and the characters. I was like, whoa, this game really is something. Like, yeah, I can't wait to get a 4K TV, because even on like normal HD TV, the game looked absolutely amazing.
So Paul, what have you been playing?
I've been, man, list is huge. I'll try to narrow it down a little bit though. I guess I don't know if it's the most noteworthy, but I just did a post on it yesterday on Instagram, is Nex Machina, which I don't even know if that's how you really pronounce that. I'm kind of expecting one of our two listeners to get back to me and let me know exactly how to pronounce this. But in any case, Nex Machina.
That's how I would pronounce it, at least.
Smash TV kind of. That's pronounced.
Yeah, that's how I would pronounce it. I mean, I think of Deus Ex Machina, and that's, I mean.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would think of it. Except I've never really known how to pronounce that either. So I'm just kind of going on what I think it is. So hopefully I'm right and I don't sound like an idiot.
I think you are.
What, an idiot?
No, well, yeah. I mean, that beyond that.
So in any case, Nex Machina is basically a Smash TV clone on the PS4, and it really just kind of hits all the right notes. I played it with my buddy about a week or two ago, and yeah, it was great. It was an hour and a half. We played it on the normal difficulty level, which provided 99 continues. At the beginning, we were like, 99 continues? Are you kidding me? And then we used 75 of them before actually finishing the
Damn.
game. So there was a lot of dying. But with that said, it was like, man, it was super fun. Like games like, I think I might have mentioned this before, but as a general rule, I prefer my games to either be balls to the wall action or slow ass RPG. And Nex Machina was definitely just balls to the wall action. It was so much fun.
By the way, does the game have online multiplayer?
I'm gonna say probably.
Okay.
I didn't check because we were obviously playing locally, so there was no reason for me to check. But I would presume so. I don't know, man. My answer is I don't know. I'm taking a long time to just say I don't know.
And also, before we move on, like I have to mention that this game is by Housemarque, which is like one of the most famous like Finnish game studios, and they have been in the business
represent.
been in the business since the mid-90s.
I always think of them as Danish for whatever reason. So thank you for correcting, Masa.
Yeah, of course, because like I mean, as the only Finn here, and I mean, we don't really have like that many famous, game studios. Like I think usually like when people think about like Finnish games, okay, so yeah, you might know that there's like Max Payne is a Finnish game. Yeah. And then you have, on the mobile side of things, you have Clash of the Clans and Angry Birds. But a lot of people, they don't know about like Housemarque.
Well, I mean, I think Housemarque is really a hardcore gamers developer. They really have come out with a lot of great games. I remember, which one was the zombie one? I think it was Zombie Nation, maybe. But they also, last year they came out with Matterfall, and they came out with Nex Machina. But before that, I mean, their big game was Super Stardust, if you recall, which was a launch game for the PS3. And that game was kind of an oasis in the barren sea that was the PS3 launch window. And it was a twin-stick shooter, similar, I guess, to Nex Machina. I think they really have taken to that form of playing. And it really was kind of a follow-up to Geometry Wars in some way. It felt very much like in the vein of Geometry Wars, which was the big twin-stick shooter at the time. But then in the PS4 launch, they came out with Resogun, which was basically a clone of Defender. I mean, and I'm not a big historian of the arcade days of the early 1980s, but it was very much very faithful to what made Defender such a great game. So they've always taken to the kind of arcade genre of games, and it's unfortunate because as I was speaking with Paul yesterday, they've just declared that they're really gonna pull out of the arcade business, basically, of the arcade genre, because it's just not selling well. It's just not doing as well as they hope for. So after many decades, they've just kind of calling it quits on that. So I don't know exactly where they're gonna go after this. I don't know what type of genre they're going to delve into. I have very high hopes of them because they're extremely talented, but it's really a loss because these are the types of games that are just not made anymore. So did you buy the limited run edition or the physical edition?
Yeah, I bought the limited run edition of it just because, we like our physical media, right?
Mm-hmm.
True that.
So Arnie, what have you been playing?
Well, first of all, Paul, I think that it's pronounced Nex Machina.
Thank you for correcting me.
The correct terminology for that. But unlike Masa, who I believe has been trying to complete a larger amount of games this year, I've been sort of spiritually hanging myself by continuing to play 100+ hour RPGs.
Yeah, I mean that was like one of my New Year's gaming resolutions, that this year I would like play more like shorter games. And I mean, of course, I started with Uncharted, and then after that I move on to East Origin, and managed to beat them both. So I'm off to a great start.
So I feel like the less time I have, the longer games I want to play. I think there's just something, I just like to hurt myself like that. So I
This
recently
doesn't sound sustainable.
exactly. So I
Yeah,
recently
what kind of
beat,
logic is that anyways?
so I recently beat Final Fantasy 15 finally, which I really really enjoyed. Thank you,
Yeah,
Paul,
buddy.
for that for pushing me on that one. Stand by Me is now top 5 favorite songs of all time. But it was a really really interesting journey. I when I started playing it, and even when I saw other people posting about it, I didn't get the sort of the appeal. Like, it wasn't really grabbing me as much. But honestly, from like the first maybe 1 or 2 hours, I was completely hooked. I was so into the story, the characters, even the especially the battle mechanics, which I know Paul had been raving about to me beforehand, are just so, I don't want to say unique, but they're
They're fresh.
yeah, exactly. They're just such a new take on something that we've seen
Yeah.
before, that it makes the game so enjoyable.
So as someone that hasn't played it yet, I think I'm the only one out of all of us that hasn't played it. One of the things that I hear mixed reception about is the story, because some people think that the story is very engaging and they really took to it, while others tell me that they really didn't get the whole deal out of it. It was just kind of a run of the mill. So I wonder if the truth is somewhere in the middle. So, I can throw that to all you guys that have played it. What is it that you think that made the story stand out for you, or alternatively that it did not stand out for you?
So at least for me, it was the story was completely held up by the characters. So the characters are really the part that I was most interested in. I think the part that people have issue with, and I could agree with this for sure, is that I think the story doesn't take its time, doesn't really develop in the beginning of the game. I think it sort of starts somewhere in the middle and just expects you to sort of pick it up as you go along. Or I think they've also I think Square Enix has also done like an anime or a movie trying to explain sort of the beginning lore of the story to give you a little bit more context for it. But I think that's the main issue, is that the story, sort of expects you to go out of your way to learn more about it. It's not starting you off right at the beginning and sort of explaining events as they unfold to get to the point where the game starts.
So did you watch Kingsglaive, which was the movie that came out before the game released?
I haven't watched it yet, but I do want to watch it now that I've played through the game.
Yeah, for me, like, I started playing the game. That's actually like also one of the games that I've played recently. I have made it to chapter 3, but the reason why I stopped playing is that I actually do own Kingsglaive, but I haven't watched it yet, and I don't know, I just haven't gotten into the mood to watch it. So that's why I haven't continued the game yet. I gotta admit that, yeah, like, what I've played, I have enjoyed. And it's better than I expected, and especially like the battle system, because based on the demo that I played, that was not a very good representation of the battle system. Because at first I was a bit like, well, you just hold the attack button and then it automatically attacks all the enemies and that's it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to it, and I gotta say the warp attack, that is some like next level shit. That's so amazing. But before I continue playing the game, I'm definitely gonna watch Kingsglaive and also the anime, because I think that's kind of like required to get the most out of the story.
Did you watch it, Paul?
No, I didn't. I don't know, maybe I'm old fashioned, but I kind of figured that if you're releasing a movie and a game at the same time, and in order to enjoy the game you're required to watch the movie, then your game is a narrative failure. If you're gonna, no, but it's for real though, right? Like, I don't want to have to watch a movie to enjoy a game. That kind of sounds old manny, but that's kind of how I felt about it. And frankly, having not seen the movie, so my opinion here is uninformed. I don't know, man. Even if I had seen the movie, my only problem with Final Fantasy 15 was that it just kind of felt like things were happening, and I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this now, and I didn't really know why.
Mm-hmm.
So it and like the narrative just kind of really jumped kind of from one point to another, And again, I just didn't really get what was going on. Like Arnie was saying, the characters were mostly well fleshed out. I liked all of them. I didn't like Ignis, I should say, but the other three, I was like, yeah, I can get behind these guys. Kind of carried it between the characters and the combat. That's kind of what carried it for me.
Well, there was this big push, at least in the mid 2000s, and then it's kind of continued to varying degrees of this multimedia push that the game has to have an anime and it has to have this other mobile game, and Square Enix really went in all that on that. And I'm just not a big fan of it, as it's the same case with you, Paul. And I call it kind of the Bungie style of storytelling, where if you really want to figure out what the hell's going on in the story, you have to go into all these other materials and kind of really spend a lot of time researching it. And I'm just not a big fan.
No thanks.
Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of that. I think really you should have exposition, and if you're not able to meld the story beats that you wanna give to your viewer or reader or player into the experience itself, then that just means that you just failed at telling the story. So at least that's to me. I think that if you have to go out of your way, same with you, maybe I'm getting repetitive, but if you have to go out of your way, then you just haven't fulfilled your job as a storyteller.
Yeah. Well, I think at some point, these sort of multimedia, like these movies, these animes, they can be a nice complement to a game. But I think the way that Square Enix did it in this sort of instance, it just becomes kind of paid DLC. Like, if you really want to understand this story, like, here's, this movie, this anime that you have to watch so you can go into the game sort of at the point where the characters are. I think that maybe companies like, for example, like Atlas, I know they do a lot of animes based on Shin Megami Tensei properties, but it's sort of a retelling of the events of the story. So it's not required viewing or required reading to sort of understand the self-contained story of every game.
I guess it's down to me then and what I have been playing. And in between bouts of the never-ending Breath of the Wild, which, I restarted that game again, so I basically started from scratch, and that game is just endless. And I love it. I'm enjoying every single minute of it. I am not complaining at all whatsoever about Breath of the Wild being 160 hours long, or 200 if you're Masa. But
exactly.
But in between that, I also was able to finish some of my backlog from last year and the games that I wasn't able to finish last year. And I know that we talked in our last episode about our games for the year, and there was some regret on my part that there were some games that I just hadn't gotten around to playing. And I recently finished one that it took me a while to play it and really get into it, but I do get where people are coming from with respect to having it be their game of the year, and that's Nier Automata. And the Nier franchise, it's kind of incredible that it's just burst into the scene and just gained this massive upsurge of popularity, because it's very much a niche genre. It's very much a niche franchise. It doesn't, Nier, the original one, was very much a word of mouth game. It's not a game that received very high reviews. It's not a game that was known to a lot of people, but it just kind of gradually just built a lot of steam, and it just kind of segued into this new game, which was developed by Platinum Games. And the mix of Yoko Taro, which is the designer and director of the game, and Platinum Games, I think it's very good, because Platinum has the chops to make a very tight, well-playing game, and Yoko Taro can basically go wild with his stories. But as I discussed with you guys outside of the podcast, I really had a hard time getting into Nier Automata within the first few 6 hours, I would say. And I really thought I was going to just drop it. I was just thinking, I'm just really not being hooked by this. And even right now, I'm kind of going back and forth on whether Nier Automata is actually a good game or not. And I know that might sound weird, but even if I can't really have an answer to that, I don't think it really matters. I don't really care, because eventually when the game really started hitting on all cylinders, it really made it into such a standout experience. And I think I mentioned in Instagram that it just kind of started going up in ranking and score as I played more through it. And initially I was very hesitant to go through the whole idea of playing the game various times in order to get the full picture. But I really don't think that does it justice as to what the game is trying to do. It's really, you play the first scenario, let's say, and that one's maybe 16 hours long. And then the second scenario is just basically the same thing, but from a different perspective. And it really has a lot of different play styles. It just plays completely different. And it also plays a whole lot faster. So you go through the whole story in a much quicker manner, but from a different perspective. And then from that point forward, it just kind of goes batshit crazy. It really just it really advances the story. It's just what I try to explain to people is that the story doesn't end with the first playthrough. It really there is a story that continues, and I just find it very daring that a developer would be willing to just hide the probably 3/4 of the game from the player. And even Square Enix, once you beat the first scenario, the PR team from Square Enix actually sends you this message saying, if you want to get the full experience from Nier Automata, you should play through the game again. So it's kind of a nudge, but you can clearly see that Yoko Taro, this didn't come from him. He doesn't want you to be pushed into replaying the game again. And what's strange is that if you play the game with just the first scenario, it's going to be a kind of hopeful ending. But then if you continue playing the game, then everything just goes to shit. And what you thought was the ending of the game, and you're kind of like feeling a little bit, heartwarmed, and you feel like, oh man, there might be a future after all. Everything just comes crumbling back down, and just the rug gets just swept underneath your feet. And a lot of the things that you notice in the first scenario that you couldn't really explain, but you just kind of pushed it to the side, they really do start making sense in the playthroughs that come after. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and just throw it to you guys. I know Masa, you were able to play through the first scenario, but did any of you other guys were you able to play this game or not?
I started playing it last week, and I'm about 3 hours in, and unlike you, it's hooked me, man. Like I said, I like my action games with a lot of action, and when it gets to those parts where you're fighting a lot of enemies and so on, you've got multiple options for attacks between long range and short range. I'm hooked. It grabbed me right away.
Well, I also, Paul, I imagine that with you, the mix of action game and bullet hell shooter it must be like a match made in heaven because you like your shooters.
Oh yeah, 100%, man. That game. I'm 3 hours in, and I know I'm gonna finish it. It's a lot of fun. The atmosphere is great. Even simple, like it's got all the little things too, like when 2B starts running really fast, like it just looks really cool. Right? She's this android and she's running super fast. I like looking at that. Even when you have her walking at normal speed, she has this walk. Like, I don't know, do you know what I'm talking about here? She's got this walk like she fucking owns the place. It makes me...
It's a strut, basically, which is...
Yeah, thank you. That's the word. She doesn't walk, dude. She fucking struts. She's there for business. Like I said, little things.
It's funny because I was playing it and my girlfriend was right next to me and she just goes, "Man, she's really stylish." So
But yeah, like I mean, if you're checking out the cosplay community, like 2B is like all the rage. Like she has been like, I mean, I think she was probably like the most cosplayed character of 2017. And one of the biggest reasons why the game ended up becoming so huge.
Yeah, I really think it was. I'm trying to figure out why the game blew up as much as it did, and we gotta admit that the design of 2B was probably a big part of it. I kind of think back to when Hideo Kojima said in Metal Gear Solid 5 that he was designing his characters to be cosplayable. And, everyone kind of laughed at that. But here is Yoko Taro, who kind of just in a very subtle way just put it out there. And it actually worked. People actually took to it. So I very much, if that's what gets you to make games as amazing and as inventive as Nier Automata, I'm all in. Just, make it as cosplayable as possible. I don't care. So, did you go back to it, Masa?
Not yet, but I'm definitely planning to do it. Especially like after you have been like hyping it up. Because I felt satisfied after my first playthrough, but I mean, of course, I was very aware of the fact that you have to play through multiple times. What happened with me and the game was that it came out at the worst possible time. Because it came out around the time when I was, busy playing Breath of the Wild, and then after that, Persona 5 came out. So I was like, well, Nier was actually one of my most anticipated games of 2017, and I loved it. But I just didn't have I guess I just didn't have the proper time to put into it, like when it was like completely fresh. But I'm definitely.
You don't have to explain. Yeah. Breath of the Wild came out. That's it. That's all you need to say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was game over for other games.
Well, those are two pretty big bookends. I mean, when you're between Breath of the Wild, which is 200 hours, and Persona 5, which is 120, I mean, and those were some of the best games. I mean, Breath of the Wild, most of us agreed that it was the game of the year last year. Yeah, that's a rough pairing to have to go up against. But I do hope that you go back to it, because it really makes it all the much better. And before I close on this segment, I just want to mention that perhaps what makes this game the most for me is just the music. I don't know, how they did it, but it's such an alien, just beautiful melodic music. And it actually, Emmy Evans, who was one of the vocalists for the game, for the soundtrack, she actually built up a fake language, and most of the music in the game is actually sung in this fake language. And as I was playing through it, I was just thinking, what type of language is this? Is this Finnish? But it really makes it stand out. If I could make a callback, it sounds a lot like Sigur Rós. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that band. It's an Icelandic post-rock band, and the sound just kind of very much sounds like Sigur Rós, and it's just very, very awesome. And I've just been putting it on repeat over and over and over again. So we're probably going to have a little bit of a snippet in one of our breaks. But I think it's just amazing. And I'm looking forward to the vinyl release, which was apparently sold out as soon as it was up on the Square Enix store. So, hopefully at some point I'm going to be able to get it. But so that's what I've been playing. So we're back from our break, and we're ready to get to the main event, and we're going to be brawling, guys. We're going to be punching our way through the streets. I'm in New York City, so I'm very much in the mood, because it seems like all these games were a variation of New York City. So I'm very much in it, man. I mean, I'm going to go out after this and just punch some bad guys in the subway, or I don't know. I'm probably going to end up punching.
Just don't get yourself arrested or anything.
I'm probably going to end up punching some juppies, because that's all New York has nowadays. I mean, if Streets of Rage saw New York, nowadays, they would be very disappointed. I mean, the beat 'em up genre, I think this is one of the genres that is very much beloved by the gamer community. I think it's one of those genres that is extremely simple, and when you really think about it, you ask, what do? You just punch bad guys, and you just progress through levels just punching your way through things. But for some reason, it's just kind of stuck with gamers, and it's just kind of really, even though it's kind of faded, it really has become a nostalgia pipeline for a lot of gamers. So before we jump into that, I want to ask you guys, how would you define the beat 'em up? Because it was kind of one of the issues that we kind of encountered when we set about talking about this, which was, what are the boundaries of the beat 'em up? What makes a beat 'em up a beat 'em up? So I want to ask you guys, what do you think makes a beat 'em up a beat 'em up?
I think punching, kicking, limited amount of weapons, and that's kind of where it begins. Once you start equipping swords and becoming Bayonetta and so on and so forth, then it kind of becomes its own subgenre. Even though the gameplay is similar, I don't care. That's still a subgenre. And that's kind of where the beat 'em up starts for me. Punching, kicking, and there you go.
Yeah, I'd say the multiplayer aspect to it. I know there are single player beat 'em ups, but when I think of a beat 'em up, it's definitely something, you go to the arcade and it's the biggest cabinet there with like 2 to 4 control sticks for all your friends to stand around and just drop quarters into. So it's more of a I don't want to say familial experience, but definitely more of a social experience. The beat 'em up more so than any other game.
Good point.
Well, yeah, I think I try to come up with a definition, and personally, I would define it as a genre that can be played by 1 to 4 players, and this could be on a side-scrolling or 3D plane, even though side-scrolling is really where it's most famous for. And it is linear in nature. There shouldn't be a lot of non-linearity in the game. And with a primary emphasis on using your fists or martial arts, as Paul has just mentioned, as you battle waves of opponents. Really, the emphasis should not be on the weapons, as Paul said. There are some exceptions, like maybe Golden Axe or Guardian Heroes, but even those kind of feel still a little bit of an offshoot or a spin-off of the beat 'em up game, and we really want to differentiate it from the hack and slash type of games, which could be Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, or even the Dynasty Warrior games, which you take on wave after wave of enemies, but it's usually weapons based. So I think it really has to be more of an emphasis on punches, and that makes sense, considering it's called a beat 'em up or a brawler. Masa, do you have any definition that you think makes a beat 'em up stand out?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just all about like punching motherfuckers in the face. The end. It's that simple.
Yeah, and I think it may be that simple. It may be the fact that, and maybe that's why it's so popular. It's just you punch motherfuckers in the face. And it's cathartic in a way that you can just go after school. At least I'm speaking about it from the perspective of late 80s, early 90s, which was really the peak or the apex of the beat 'em up genre. And you would go after school maybe with a couple of buddies and just pump quarters and just beat up dudes, man. I mean, that was really, it doesn't get any more simple and elemental than that, and I think it must have been one of the reasons why it was so popular. So let me ask you guys, what is the first beat 'em up that you remember playing? We have talked about beat 'em ups in the arcade, but there are also beat 'em ups that were more popular in the console sphere. So what is the first beat 'em up that you remember playing, and what do you think of it at the time?
Well, for me, it was Double Dragon in the arcade. At the time, I wasn't even really playing that many arcade games. There were arcade machines at some of the corner stores near my house. So I was playing stuff like 1943, Ikari Warriors, and then Double Dragon came out, and Double Dragon just absolutely took over my life. It was absolutely bonkers. I remember playing it for weeks, months. I don't even really remember, but it was a long time that I played that game, quite a bit. And that was even before reaching the final boss. By the way, we called that final boss Machine Gun Larry. And I have no idea why Larry was the scariest name we could come up with. I guess like we were 10 years old, but he had a machine gun, therefore he was Machine Gun Larry. And yeah, man, I have so many fond memories of that game. Like it was perfect at the time. I never got tired of it. I even remember like we had a video store, close to my parents' house, like a block away. And I remember the first time we reached Machine Gun Larry, it was like this big deal. Like, oh my God, this guy has a gun. It was insane.
That's not
and
fair.
It's not, dude. He would kill you with one bullet, right? As he should. And I remember running out of quarters while we were at Larry, and I had like $1 bill. And I swear to God, I remember going to the lady working at the counter at the video store, and I was like frantic. Like it must have looked like I had to pee really badly. I was like, I need change. And I like my little buddy was on the machine, and he was trying to survive and not doing too well. And she was on the phone with someone, and she just could not be less interested in what I had to offer her. And so she eventually does give me the quarters, and it was too late. We died. We couldn't continue. But we eventually did beat Machine Gun Larry.
Well, and that's one of the part about beat 'em ups that if you played it in the arcade, you have that experience where you die and everyone is scrambling. Give me a quarter, give me a quarter. It's like I'm getting killed. Come on, man, it's really really hard. And
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, Arnie. If you don't mind, I just want another 30 seconds here. I have one problem with Double Dragon, and it's bothered me for almost 30 years. So I don't know if you guys remember the original arcade marquee at the top of the cabinet. The two protagonists, the guy wearing the blue and the guy wearing the red, they each had a tattoo on their shoulders. One guy was Spike and the other guy was Hammer. So, of course, we called them Spike and Hammer, right?
Yeah.
So player 1 is Spike, 2 is Hammer, everybody's happy. And then the home versions were released, and the characters were named Billy and Jimmy Lee. And I mean, I'm sorry, that's a colossal mistake. Because
you mean Jimmy and Jimmy.
Sure, whatever. And look, if I'm Machine Gun Larry, and I hear that two guys wearing matching vests and pants named Billy and Jimmy are coming after me, I'm not worried. I'm just gonna continue eating my bonbons and watching Young and the Restless, and that's fine. But if I know Spike and Hammer are coming after me, you better fucking believe I'm taking that shit seriously. So, you know what? Technos, Taito, whoever, shame on you.
I think it was actually Technos America that renamed it, and that was actually on the NES. It just came out on the NES, and they just changed it. And it was like, you know what, guys? The United States, they're just not going to get Spike and Hammer. We just got to call them good old-fashioned, good old American boys, Billy and Jimmy. And, that's how I know them. But
what a travesty.
But for you, Paul, I must imagine that was really, really disappointing.
It'll bother me until I die.
So, Arnie, you were saying?
Oh no, I was just gonna say that Paul just gave me major war flashbacks because I feel like there are few times in my life that I've been more terrified yet enraged than when I die on a beat 'em up and I have to run all the way to the coin making machine that I put my dollar bill into, and then it spits it back out, and then I have to sort of flatten it and then put it back in, and the slow sort of gears grinding to give me my 4 quarters back before I run back to the machine. All the while the countdown is going down to the game over. It's probably happened maybe a total of 3 times in my life, but they were so impactful to my development as a child.
Oh man, it's just a tour de force of poor planning, because a smarter person would just arrange his change beforehand. But no, when you're a kid, you put in the dollar, you get your quarters back, or you give the dollar to whoever's working behind the counter, you get your quarters, and you run over to the machine. You don't even think about what's going to happen later. And then, bam.
Well, that's funny because I actually, the most recent beat 'em up I beat in the arcades was Alien vs. Predator. And I actually had learned my lesson. I had the quarters just stacked out there. It was just a full stack of quarters. And man, we were pumping those quarters. It was a lot of quarters, but I was ready. I was not going to let myself, be, defeated by the countdown. But as a kid, you just had them in your pocket. And it was like, maybe your friend was not as good, so you were just giving him quarters, and it was just like you ran out. It was like, come on, man, come on, get some quarters. So it's just one of those indelible memories of being a kid and growing up in the arcade that I think it's a delight to remember, but at the time it was just so stressful. So Arnie, what is your first memory of a beat 'em up? I know you're the youngest one of us, so I'm just wondering if you also had an experience at the arcade and the like.
Yeah, so I have 2 distinct memories, and I can't remember which one is first, but I do remember young Arnaldo being in a bowling league and this is important to the story because we played. It's very important. We played at this like sort of rundown mall where essentially it was a mall, but it only had two things open, and it was a grocery store on the first level, and then a bowling alley that was almost the entirety of the third level. And that bowling alley had one of the worst arcade setups probably that I've ever seen. Every machine was broken or dirty or just not fun. But amongst all that, they did have the Simpsons arcade beat 'em up game.
Oh my God, yes.
Which was the crown jewel of the entire thing. So I do remember every Saturday when I would go there after doing like 2 hours of bowling, I would just go and just pump quarters mindlessly into this machine. I don't think I ever made it very far, but it's definitely like the first arcade beat 'em up that I remember playing consistently.
So did you pick Marsh? Did you pick Marsh because you gotta have the vacuum cleaner?
No, it was always Homer or Bart for me. Always Homer or Bart.
It's funny because the Simpsons arcade is kind of one of those arcade cabinets that I would probably say it's the most popular beat 'em up with the public at large. Because for a lot of us, maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is probably the most popular one. But for the public at large, I mean, everyone knows The Simpsons. I mean, it's still going, and it's 2018. And it came out really early. I think it came out just after its first season or while the first season was going on. And it just became a staple of arcades. And if you actually go to an arcade nowadays and you see the Simpsons arcade cabinet, most of the time, at least one of the controllers is not going to be working. So the buttons are just like all destroyed because people have just been banging on these buttons for 20 years. Actually, no. Probably like 28 years. I mean, it came out in 1991. So 27 years, this has been in a staple of arcade machines. So what's the second memory?
The second one is I was at a summer camp, and I must have been 10 or 11, maybe a little younger than that. But it was the summer camp that was held at this military academy for the summer. So during the summers, they would empty it out, and then they just use the facilities as a summer camp. And I remember they set up a room, one of the classrooms, and they just filled it with Super Nintendos and Sega Genesis. There was maybe like 6 of them like lined up, and sort of that was like the free period area. You could go in there and play. And one of the games they had on there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time. And I remember, just spending so much. Every chance I got, I'd go and sneak in that room and just play some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Again, I don't think I ever beat that game, but I just remember playing it for hours and not, never getting tired of it, just over and over and over and over again.
And I don't think you can understate the importance of having the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license on the popularity of the beat 'em up. Most of us grew up on the Ninja Turtles or, the Hero Turtles if you're in Europe. But it really was the perfect time because we were all in love with it. And here comes this game where you can play with your buddies and you can play as Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Leonardo. Oh, God, I almost forgot the last one. But I really think that the Ninja Turtles were a big reason why the beat 'em up genre was so popular. It was the ideal time. So
the arcade game was basically perfect.
Oh yeah. And it's just, I mean, they weren't very well balanced games. I don't think any of them were. I mean, they were cheap by their very nature, but you just didn't even care, man. I mean, it was just, you were just having fun beating up dudes and the Foot Clan. So I think, Turtles in Time, I don't have it because it's really gone up in price recently in the collector market. I think right now it's about, I would say $60 to $70.
It's even worse in Europe. It's like, I think it's definitely over 100 euros here.
Oh.
And that's a loose cartridge. A boxed one is like 200.
Yeah. Is the label different? Like, is it Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in Time?
That actually, I'm not sure about that, but yeah, it must be Hero. Cause yeah, I mean, I remember, I was a huge Turtles fan as a kid, and yeah, it was indeed like Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Although I personally, I've always called it Ninja Turtles. because it sounds cooler.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I didn't know about Teenage Mutant until I got to this country because in Cuba we would call them the Ninja Turtles. In Spanish, of course, which was like Las Tortugas Ninjas. So that's why we all knew it. And let me tell you, I mean, that's probably, not to get into a digression here, but that probably goes to show how great the Ninja Turtles were because you could be in any given country, and if you were a kid, man, you loved those Ninja Turtles, because even in Cuba where we got nothing, the Ninja Turtles were just our jam, man. And I must imagine in Finland, Masa, that was also the same.
Yeah, it was the same. Yeah, I mean, the toy line was huge. We got the comics. The movies were big. And I mean, of course, we got the cartoon as well, and the games. Because a lot of games never actually made it to Finland. And the Turtles games on the NES, like those already, like the first Turtles game, it was like one of the biggest NES releases, even here. So, and that's why the game is worth basically nothing, because everybody owned that game back in the day. But yeah, it was definitely like, I think the Turtles might have even been like the biggest of the 80s, early 90s, like these kids franchises in Finland, even bigger than the Transformers or Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, all these others.
Oh man, I thought Street Sharks was your jam. I mean, that was that was my jam. This is probably too old for Paul. I'm sorry, Paul. We used to get this in the summer in Cuba because we had, our cartoons typically were from 6 to 8 p.m. That's the only time block that we would get cartoons. But in the summer, you would get cartoons every morning. And it was all those cartoons from the 80s. It was Transformers, it was the Turtles, it was G.I. Joe, Thundercats. My personal favorite, Silverhawks. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I really
No, I never heard.
Oh, I love the Silverhawks, man. I mean, they were just so cool. So that was my jam. But anyways, we're really digressing here. Maybe we'll make an episode about 80s cartoons. But Masa, I'm really curious about what the beat 'em up genre was like in Finland. So what were your experience and what were your memories of it?
Well, first of all, it was a bit different for me because, like, you guys were talking about all these, like, arcade experiences. We have always had arcades. I mean, of course, they disappeared in the early 2000s. But for example, I'm lucky enough to live in Helsinki where we actually have an arcade nowadays. But back in the old days, I actually don't even remember if I have ever really played any actual beat 'em ups, like for example Ninja Turtles or Turtles in Time. I mean, I have never played the arcade version of that game. A lot of these other like famous beat 'em ups, I have only played like the home console ports of those. So it's very different. And even when we had arcades, I feel like our games, I mean, we did have beat 'em ups, but all these arcades were mainly based on like these bigger cities, and I used to live in a very small city back in the day, so we didn't even have an arcade. So I actually missed out on many of these like classic arcade games. And when I was thinking about the whole thing, like you asked us like what was the first arcade? Oh, well, not the arcade game, but the first beat 'em up you ever played. And I was actually like thinking about it. I was like, well, I mean, I had Battletoads, I had Double Dragon, I had Turtles 2 on the NES, but then I remembered that there was something even before that, and it's a game that I never really even thought about, or like I didn't really consider it like being a beat 'em up because it was still like, it was more like that old like early 80s arcade style, and that's actually like my first arcade game was Kung Fu. And that's, I mean, a lot of people don't, like when we talk about all these like legendary and classic beat 'em ups, like that game never really comes up, even if it's like one of the, I would say even like one of the most famous NES games. But it's still like so different compared to these a bit more advanced beat 'em ups that I think a lot of people just kind of like forget that it exists, especially like when we talk about like beat 'em ups. It's more like, well, I mean, Kung Fu was a fun arcade game, but it's like it's not talked in the same way as like you talk about Double Dragon.
I almost feel like it's a side-scrolling action game.
Well, it's generally seen as the first beat 'em up, but I just think that it's kind of a necessary evolutionary step towards the beat 'em up. And I think if you really go back to it, just going back on the history, Renegade. I don't know if you guys ever played that, which was I think the first Kunio-kun game, and I think that came out in 1986, and I think it really was the first beat 'em up that played with the 4 to 8 direction movement where you could just move up, down, left, right, and punch your way through it. But Kung Fu really didn't have that. It was just kind of side scrolling, and you beat bad guys, as they came. But it definitely was, I think, a necessary step. And Kung Fu, I think, came out in 1984, so that was way back.
Yeah, but yeah, like after Kung Fu, like I mentioned the games like Battletoads, and when you talk about Battletoads, of course you gotta mention the infamous Turbo Tunnel. It's still to this day I have not beaten, so yeah.
Well, I'm always amazed that there are some folks out there that can actually beat it blindfolded, and I just think it's showing off clearly, but
yeah, no, I don't care for these people.
I had a friend who was able to beat the Turbo Tunnel, but I was always like, yeah, it's my controller. I just can't do it because of the controller. And I mean, I did have a jacked like D-pad, so I mean, it wasn't just an excuse. But like, I never actually like realized that it was like such a famous or like famously difficult level. And then like, I mean, just a few years ago, like when I started watching like all these like retro gaming YouTube videos, and then I was like, wait, you have all these like people like the AVGN and all these other like famous YouTubers like there was this like Turbo Tunnel challenge, and it was like, people trying to beat it. I was like, wait, so it was legit difficult? So it wasn't just me and my NES controller that sucked, but yeah, it was like legit difficult.
Well, the tunnel contributed to Masa's self-esteem in the 90s, so I'm sorry. I mean, you should probably ask for an apology from Rare. Just to go on to my game, my first memory, I think my first memory of a beat 'em up, and I distinctly recall it, it's one of the memories that just kind of stays in your head, and you can still picture it. I think there are a few memories like that when you're a kid, but some of them just stay in there. And it was actually Streets of Rage 1 on the Genesis. I remember before that I had only seen the Super Nintendo, and then I go to this friend's house, and there's a Sega Genesis there. And mind you, this was in Cuba, so these systems were not very common. And I see a game being played there, and it's colorful, and you're punching through things. And then I see this special come in, and this cop car just comes blasting in through the screen, and just this cop just takes out a rocket launcher and just blasts it into the middle of the screen. And man, our love for Streets of Rage was born that day, and that was my first beat 'em up memory. And I gotta say, that was a pretty good first memory, because if you're gonna start out with Streets of Rage, I think you did right. I think that was a pretty good memory. But funnily enough, I did not play Streets of Rage again until many, many years later. And it stuck with me so much that I always wanted to recapture that game. I always wanted to see what that game was. And then later on, it just became an obsession with that franchise. But beyond that, I also remember that in Cuba, of all places where we didn't have arcades, the first arcade cabinet that I actually even saw and played was actually Captain Commando for the arcades developed by Capcom. And I don't know if any of you guys played this, because it was not a very well-known game, but Captain Commando was the mascot that Capcom had back in the 80s and the early 90s, and so they built this beat 'em up around it, and it's a beautiful looking game, but for some reason, I don't know why, there was just one arcade cabinet in Cuba, and it was Captain Commando. And I'd love to go there every once in a while and play with my little brother, and it's kind of a bonkers game. There's a character that's actually a baby genius that built a mech for himself and now fights with a mech. And there's a mummy called Mac the Knife. that uses knives. It's just a bonkers game, and I actually recently beat it again through the Capcom Classics collection on the PS2. So if you want to play that, definitely check that out. I think it's Volume 2 of the Capcom Classics collection, and it's just a fun game. So those were my two memories of growing up with beat 'em ups. So I think those were pretty good memories, and it's just kind of built into a lifelong, obsession or fandom for the beat 'em up genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to ask, as all three of you really, because it seems like all three of you have done this, especially directed at Paul, because I feel like it might have been a more direct thing for him. But playing something like Double Dragon in the arcades and then picking it up for console at the time, was that something that when you played it on console, you immediately noticed a significant difference? Was it a thing where you preferred to play it in the arcade?
Yeah, 100%. Any 8-bit rendition of an arcade game was disappointing almost every single time as a kid. The only exception might have been Double Dragon 2 for the NES, because Double Dragon 2, it didn't even try to be like Double Dragon 2 in the arcade. It was almost kind of its own thing, and therefore wasn't really that disappointing because it just felt much different. It felt like its own thing. It wasn't until Streets of Rage that the arcade experience really came home. And I remember, man, when I played Streets of Rage that first time, getting it for Christmas, it blew me away. I was like, okay, we're done. I don't need to go to the arcade anymore. It's right here. We're good.
So I think, Arnie, as with most of you, a lot of my experience were with the NES. So I first played Double Dragon in the NES. So for me, Bimmy and Jimmy, just to not call him Billy. And by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, there was a typo in the original NES game, and instead of Billy, they spelled it as Bimmy. So it's one of those controversial typos, from localization. So Paul, it's not even Billy and Jimmy, it's Bimmy and Jimmy. So Machine Gun Larry, if he hears Bimmy and Jimmy, he's just gonna be like, well, I'm just gonna go back to watching the Golden Girls.
Yeah.
So for me, Arnie, I really, it was the NES, and the first Double Dragon, I played it in Cuba on the NES. Actually, I even remember it was on the top loader, on the NES top loader. And, one of the trivia of Double Dragon is that on the NES, it was actually just one player. So for a game that was built around the multiplayer, it was really ironic that the one that it's most known for, because I think actually the NES game is even more popular in terms of the gamer mentality than the arcade game. I personally have never played the arcade cabinet of Double Dragon, so Paul, you have the leg up on me on that. But it's actually, ironic that it didn't have two players. And by the way, at the end of Double Dragon, if Paul, I don't think you mentioned this, you actually fight your brother. So Billy and Jimmy are brothers, and at the end you actually fight him. So that's kind of a big plot twist. Big plot twist.
Interesting.
Man, what a spoiler.
I think the winner, unless someone actually gets the girl. So you fight your buddy, and whoever wins gets the girl. She evidently has no choice. It's just, whatever guy has better fists, that's who she's dating.
What a time to be alive.
But yeah, imagine if there was a game, like a modern game with that kind of ending. Like, imagine the uproar over that.
Yeah, and well deserved, let's be honest.
This game did not care for your PC, I mean, these games were just products of the 80s. They were violent. I mean, I don't remember any blood in the games, but they were pretty violent.
100%, man. Right at the beginning of Double Dragon, right at the beginning of that game, Marion gets punched in the stomach and then knocked unconscious from this gut shot, and then she gets carried off. And it's like, holy shit.
It's what most people remember from that game. It's really the gut punch heard around the world, and that's how it starts. That's how it starts, with domestic violence. So.
Not domestic. They don't know each other. It's just regular.
Well, actually, in the NES game, in order to justify the fact that you beat your brother and you fight your brother, it turns out that Jimmy was actually the one that orchestrated the kidnapping of Marianne, who was Billy's girlfriend. So he was jealous.
Not Jimmy.
And it was Jimmy. So yeah, maybe it was domestic after all. All right, so guys, let's move on, and I want to talk about the game that you love the most of the beat 'em up genre and what you think it exemplifies of that genre. So maybe let's start with Masa. Masa, what do you think is your favorite game of the beat 'em up genre?
Okay, so I have two, and I can't really like leave either out of these out. The first one, which we already talked about, it's of course Turtles in Time. But like honestly, I'm not even sure what makes it so amazing. It might actually be like the license that it's the Turtles, because we were always like so used to like having these like really horrible like licensed games, and I mean it's still like that even today. Like most of these like I don't know like are there even any other like decent Turtles games? Like even the game developed by Platinum was a very, very bad game and one of their worst games. But yeah, I would have to go, yeah, Turtles in Time. And my second pick is Battletoads and Double Dragon. That was one game that I was absolutely like obsessed with as I guess I wasn't a kid anymore at that time, but in my early teens. And it's a game that I played over and over again with my friend, and it's kind of like what Arnie mentioned in our intro, that beat-em-ups have always been about like the whole multiplayer experience rather than, you playing it alone. And that's like one of the reasons why like these past few, like let's say a couple of years, I haven't even like played all these like classic beat-em-ups as much as I used to. Because my girlfriend isn't into that kind of games, and of course, as I'm getting older, I meet my friends like less often, and that's like one like nowadays I mainly play single player games, and beat 'em ups aren't something that I would like to play alone. But yeah, Battletoads and Double Dragon, I would say my favorite thing about that game was that I really loved Battletoads on the NES, even if I never made it past the Turbo Tunnel, which is the third stage. And I also love Double Dragon, but their combined forces just made the game like I don't know. I really feel like this might be like my ultimate beat 'em up. And also one of the best things about this game is that it's not impossible, because at least to me I felt like Battletoads was impossible, and like all three Double Dragon games are also like quite challenging. Especially, like, of course, the first game was a single-player game, and then I believe the third game. Yeah, did you have like limited amount of continues?
Yeah, you did.
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, so those were like almost like impossible. But Battletoads and Double Dragon, while it's a very challenging game, but yeah, I mean, I guess it was like one of those games that I just played over and over again until I got like really good at it. But I mean, that's like one game that I've beaten like dozens of times. And
I don't believe you. I don't believe this for a second, because I played that game. I played that game last year with a buddy, and at the end of like 2 hours, where we were just slamming our heads against the wall, we were like, "Fuck this game! I'm never playing it again." I can't believe you beat that game. That's unbelievable to me.
But yeah, I mean that's the same. Like when when you see all these people like talking about Battletoads on the NES, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not even that difficult," and there's like, for fuck's sake, I can't even make it past the level. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I just going back to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for a second. It's kind of there were two big companies in the '90s that were just putting out great after great beat 'em up games, and that was Konami and Capcom. And I don't know if you guys favored Konami or favored Capcom, but Konami had the Turtles license, and they also had the Batman license. And so they put out some great licensed games. Konami did. They were just putting out great games. But Capcom was no slouch, man. I mean, and when I think of Capcom and their beat 'em ups, they were just beautiful. They were just beautiful, beautiful games. But Konami just hit it out of the park with Turtles in Time, man. And funnily enough, Masa, I haven't played Battletoads versus Double Dragon, so I've there's a beat 'em up that I still need to get to. So looking forward to it, considering you consider it to be your perfect beat 'em up.
Yeah, and one more thing about that game is that often like for example Final Fight and all the Final Fight games, they are excellent, but also they are like I would say when it comes to the variety, they are on a bit of a simpler side, because it's just like you just walk forward and punch motherfuckers in the face, and that's all to it. But like Battletoads and Double Dragon, like, yeah, I mean, you have a new version of Turbo Tunnel, which is not impossible this time, and then you even have like shoot 'em up stages, and there's a lot of like even like some platforming. So I think that's what really appeals to me when it comes to that game. So because there's like so much variety, it's not just going forward and punching people, because even if the game is really good, it might get tiring after a while.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It does have some variety. Also notable for being another game where women get punched in the stomach. And and Masa, I couldn't believe it when I saw this last year. I think if you play as one of Battletoads, when you attack the women, he literally grabs her by the fucking hair and then punches her in the stomach.
Yeah.
And I saw this last year, and I was like, oh, good God, this could never be released today.
Yeah. But I mean, back in the 90s, it was like business as usual.
Yeah.
Happens
all the time.
Is Battletoads Double Dragon like one of the first major like video game crossovers, like of franchises like that? I'm struggling to think of another one that's as big.
It actually might be, yeah.
It might be.
Which is awesome. I mean, you got your Battletoads and my Double Dragons. I mean, that to a 10-year-old, that must have been so amazing. Arnie, what's your favorite beat 'em up? What do you think is a beat 'em up that to you exemplifies the genre and you always think about when you're thinking about beat 'em ups?
So the question is twofold for me. I just want to say that I do agree with you that Konami and Capcom are probably kings of at least my childhood in terms of beat 'em up. I think Konami is sort of the king of the licensed beat 'em up, whereas Capcom is the king of the original IP beat 'em up. But in terms of the beat 'em up that sort of exemplifies what a beat 'em up is to me, it's probably the X-Men arcade machine, actually.
Yes. Dude,
that
6 players, man.
I know, and that I think really like when you tell me like think of a beat 'em up machine, I think of the gigantic, like obscenely large X-Men arcade machine with the 2 screens and the setup for like 6 people. And that's the one that I'm like, every time I see it, I'm like, I'm going to pump at least a couple quarters in here and, just go to town until I die.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was Konami. I mean, Konami was just hitting it out of the park at the time, but
another big license
6
for Konami.
players, I mean, it's just massive, just a huge, massive arcade cabinet. Did you guys play this at the arcade?
I never played it at my actual arcade. I think there was a smaller version of it that I have played before, but whenever I go to MagFest, they usually have it, and I usually get to play at least a couple rounds of it.
I played the 6-player one when I was a kid. Not often, right? Because there's limited money and so on, and plus the 6-player only available at like the big arcade, which you went to a couple times a year, but also notable for having like full voice in it.
Yeah.
Like I distinctly remember at the end of the first level, man, maybe I don't distinctly remember, but I remember Professor X talking, and I was like, holy shit, this guy's talking, and it was amazing.
You don't remember Welcome to Die?
Oh my God, no, I don't. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, unless I'm thinking of a different X-Men arcade machine, but there's a point where you get to this waterfall and Magneto shows up and he's floating in front of you, and he just says like, I can't remember the full line, but it ends with "Welcome to Die," and then he like blows the ledge that you're on and you fall off.
Oh my God, that's gonna be like my gamer thing whenever I create a profile now. It's just gonna be Paul. Here's my name. Welcome to Die.
Well, with 6 players, it just seems like the perfect birthday party game. You were probably at Chuck E. Cheese and you had all your friends there. It's like, man, we're gonna get to play X-Men. So it just seems like a perfect birthday party game.
I mean, the thing is obscenely large. Like it's the epitome of like 90s just like fucking just greed and like, this is the biggest arcade we can fit in this fucking thing. It'll probably cost you like, I mean, to get 6 people on it, that's like a guaranteed $3 right there. So this thing is like, it probably costs more than 50 cents to play at the time. I mean, this thing is
it was definitely a minimum 50, if not 75.
Yeah, so this thing is an obscene like money machine.
X-Men, welcome to die.
Paul, what's your favorite beat 'em up? What's the beat 'em up that you think about? I know we've talked about Double Dragon, but is there another one that you think you hold near and dear to your heart nowadays that you can't quit?
The perfect beat 'em up is Streets of Rage 2. I don't even think
Oh
I
yeah.
don't even think
Drop
there's
the
any
mic.
discussion to be had on this. It's like super refined. Man, dude, I remember seeing it for the first time. I had actually traded in my Sega Genesis for a Super Nintendo because of Street Fighter 2, and a buddy of mine still had his Genesis. He got Streets of Rage 2, brought it to my house where I was having a birthday party, and we all played Streets of Rage 2 for hours. And at the end of the afternoon, I was like, please, please, please let me borrow your Genesis. I'll give you anything. Here's my Super Nintendo. Take it. I don't give a shit. And he's like, no fucking way, right? Like Streets of Rage 2. This is the game that we all want to play, and it's aged so well. The music is untouchable, absolute classic. I beat it twice just last year. I'm probably going to beat it again this year. Like it's the perfect length. It's, you have the right amount of moves in your move set. I mean, obviously nowadays you want more variety and more moves and so on and so forth, but the game is it's so refined. It's a classic. I love it.
It's perfect because that's also what I consider to be my ideal beat 'em up, and you probably know this probably because I just can't shut up about Streets of Rage 2, and even Streets of Rage 1. But I try to think about what makes it so perfect, and it really is an amalgamation of Double Dragon and Final Fight. And Streets of Rage was actually, in terms of chronology, it was later than Double Dragon and Final Fight. So for a lot of people, it was seen as kind of the interloper. It was kind of the ripoff of Final Fight. And Sega, this was kind of their first real stab at a brawler. Even though they had Golden Axe before, there's room for debate as to whether Golden Axe falls into the beat 'em up genre or not. But Sega just really, really knocked it out of the park. And when I think about what makes it so perfect, it's the great neon pastel colors of the streets. I mean, you can perfectly envision Streets of Rage in your mind. You can always call back. There's an image of Streets of Rage in your mind that never goes away because it just has such a distinct art style. It's very different from the Final Fight art style, from Double Dragon art style. It's very different. It's very smooth. It plays extremely smooth. There's very good collision detection, but above all, and Paul, you mentioned it. I mean, that Yuzo Koshiro soundtrack is just greatest. I would say probably top 5 soundtracks of all time. Both Streets of Rage 1 and Streets of Rage 2, some of the best soundtracks of all time. And I don't know what type of magic and sorcery Koshiro did in order to get such amazing sounds of the Yamaha F86 sound chip that was in the Genesis and much maligned by developers everywhere. But man, I mean, one of the things that is very frequently mentioned in referring to the Streets of Rage soundtrack is that you could play it at a club and not skip a bit. And that's exactly it. It was very much dance influence. It was very much influenced by the house music of the 90s, very much of the Detroit house scene. And it really was a game and a soundtrack that you could listen to it without even playing the game. And that was very unique for its time. And to this day, that soundtrack is still amazing. And it's on my constant rotation at work. I listen to that soundtrack all the time. And really it's what makes it really go over the edge in terms of what makes it so great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, what I would like to say about the soundtrack is that back in the days, like you would like when you had like video game music, it actually like you could like right away tell that it's from a video game, and it did really work as like you mentioned that you could like play the Streets of Rage soundtracks in nightclubs. You can't do that with a whole lot of like games from that same era. So that's definitely like something that sets Streets of Rage apart from like all these like other, for example, beat 'em ups and I mean video games in general that came out around that time. And I must admit this. Okay, so I actually played the game for the first time only a few years ago when I got the Mega Drive or Genesis collection for the PS3.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have to admit this, even as a Nintendo fanboy who played almost nothing but like Super Nintendo games back in the day and all these like Super Nintendo beat 'em ups. But if I had played Streets of Rage 2 back in the day, it probably would be my number one. But I mean, of course, since I have like more, I mean, of course, I'm looking at these games like through nostalgia goggles, like Battletoads and Double Dragon and Turtles in Time. I mean, they are amazing games, but yeah, I mean, I might have to agree with you guys that Streets of Rage 2 might be the beat 'em up.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Streets of Rage also continued the much beloved beat 'em up tradition of allowing you to also beat up on women. Is that
totally.
right? I think there
Totally.
Yeah.
It was never so egregious though as with those other games. Like those other two instances were just like, I don't know, man. There was something about them that looked completely incorrect.
But Paul, now it struck me that in Final Fight you used to beat up on Poison, and in order to not make it sound like you were beating up a woman, they actually made her transgender.
It's a trap.
They actually made her transgender to make it acceptable to hit women. So this was a problem endemic to the beat 'em up genre. Beating up women was a big issue back in the day. So
yeah, and now that I think about it, yeah, Streets of Rage 2 and the original, it had those girls with whips.
Yeah.
In Streets of Rage 1, they had like these hats that made them look like dominatrixes, and then in Streets of Rage 2, they had like the boots, and that's not so great nowadays either.
So guys, we know well that the beat 'em up has kind of gone the way of the dodo, and there really haven't been too many beat 'em ups in recent years. There are a few here and there, like Double Dragon Neon, Double Dragon 4, Power Rangers if you're Paul, but there really hasn't been a resurgence of the beat 'em up genre. So what I want to ask you guys just to close this segment is, can the beat 'em up genre ever make a comeback? And if you think it does, what would be your ideal beat 'em up?
I want to do this one first because I was hoping you'd ask this question. I do think that the beat 'em up genre does have legs. At least for me to sort of get back into it, it has to be sort of the Dungeons and Dragon's Crown sort of system, where it's a beat 'em up, but it also has RPG elements because I'm an RPG whore, and I think that stuff adds a lot more depth to the simplicity of a beat 'em up. I think that a lot of people are crave something like that. I think that, because we don't have sort of the social setting of the arcades where you play with a lot of people are just playing at home and a lot of times by themselves. You need something to sort of put under the underlying beat 'em up mechanic to make it a little more enticing for people to keep playing and be a little more invested.
Yeah, I agree. That would be awesome. And I think Dragon's Crown is carrying that torch, at least for the time being. Vanillaware did a great job with Dragon's Crown. So hopefully they keep putting out great games in that genre.
Yeah. Alternatively, you could go the God Hand route and just make it fucking insane.
You could also do that.
Yep.
So I want to answer this because clearly I've thought a lot about this, and I just want to put out, if there are any developers listening to this, please make this game. So my ideal comeback for me for a beat 'em up would be highly stylized art style with potentially animated graphics. I mean, this could be either cel shaded or a la Dragon Ball FighterZ, which just released, with a gritty urban theme, maybe New York, but in the 80s or 70s. So basically, so far so good. A myriad of playstyles, different martial arts mechanics, co-op, of course, but especially couch co-op, because I think that's critical nowadays, even though it's left out a lot of times. I would also want to have like Mass Effect type style interactions between characters, which allow you to develop affinities with them so that you could like tag team, with characters that you have a better affinity with, so that if you're buddies with, I don't know, Axel, you can like unlock a special superpower move and stuff like that. Some light RPG mechanics, as Arnie has mentioned, maybe not as much as Dungeons and Dragons, but like in the line of River City Ransom or maybe even Double Dragon Neon, which did it some years back. No branching paths because I like my linearity in my beat 'em ups. I don't know, that's just me. And a killer electro soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro. So basically, I just want a new Streets of Rage. So please, Sega, if you're listening to this, please release a new Streets of Rage. I beg you. I will do whatever. I will throw money at you if you release a new Streets of Rage. Please do it. So yeah, that's my ideal comeback. So what about the rest of you guys, Masa?
To answer your question, like at first, like I don't think like the beat 'em up genre has evolved into like all these like subgenres like hack and slash and you know like 3D brawlers and stuff. So yeah, I don't think that the like when we think about the classic beat 'em ups, like I don't think those will really come back. Or at least I mean we are still getting games like Double Dragon 4. But I don't think the genre itself, it's never gonna be the same as it was in the 90s or in the 80s. So nowadays, I think like the most popular beat 'em ups are games like, for example, the Yakuza franchise. I mean, that's fairly big, and it's getting like, I feel like it's getting more popular in the West, and I think that's probably like the way to go for the beat 'em ups because those games still have like more mainstream appeal. Games like Double Dragon 4 and Power Rangers, they only appeal to us like who grew up playing beat 'em ups. But what my ideal beat 'em up would be, I don't know, it actually might be Yakuza because I mean I've been playing Yakuza 0 lately, and it really does feel like a natural evolution. It's more complex and more story heavy as like I kind of feel like if you wanna have a modern take on the classic beat 'em ups, it kinda like if you think about how the genre has evolved, you kinda have to have like some variety and different like fighting styles in the game, and you have like it has to be a bit more story heavy, and you have to have like those RPG elements. Like Dragon's Crown is a great game, but it's still like I love that game, but it feels like a modern version of the like the 90s Capcom.
So Paul, just to close out with you, what would be your ideal beat 'em up?
Well, I mostly agree with you, Ozzy, on your take on it, except the branching paths. I actually kind of like the branching paths. Like your blueprint right there is Guardian Heroes. Guardian Heroes had multiple branching paths that you could pick and added some replay value. And another thing that Guardian Heroes had that I think is a pretty good idea is having, I mean, it had dozens of unlockable characters. And to be fair, many of them were like, one button attack kind of characters, like the No Name brand enemies. But there were quite a few unlockable characters who played very, very differently from the main five and made that game even more interesting. At least in versus mode. You couldn't use them in story mode, which, made sense because they were your enemies. But it would be nice if they had some kind of story mode where you still could play as those unlockable characters. So having a lot of unlockable characters who play very differently, that's a big plus. I think having the ability to beat the game in one sitting, or at the very least complete like an entire chapter in one sitting is also pretty good. Yeah. But not entirely 100% necessary. Like the bottom line is if you're going to make it long, at least, add some variety, right? Like God Hand. God Hand does a really good job there because it has that kind of escalating difficulty level where you start on kind of the lowest difficulty level and the better you do, the harder the game gets as you go on. And it keeps it really interesting. It keeps like this very good tension where you get bonuses for doing really well, but doing really well also means you eventually just get the shit kicked out of you. I guess what I'm saying is that Treasure and Clover should team up and they should make a game called Guardian Hand. And then I'm sold.
So I have a quick yes or no question for everybody. How do you feel about like a beat 'em up allowing you to create your own character at the beginning of the game?
That's fine. Yeah.
Yes. Let's do it.
Hand or fist to fist. Kick the nuts or twist your wrist. God power keeps my pimp hand strong. So trust me or you won't last very long. can kick your ass into the Milky Way. Milky Way. Don't act like you don't like the Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur. My arm, my arm, my arm, my arm, my arm, my arm. The summon of the powers of the God hand.
Yeah, we got a question from my friend, and the question is, what are your pet peeves as collectors? And he's also like giving some examples, like some hate the price tag, some love it, some don't mind damaged labels because it shows the history of the card, etc. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And yeah, Ozzy, do you wanna answer the question first?
Yeah, I mean, I think mine is pretty simple. I don't have a lot of pet peeves, so I don't really have a lot of things that really bother me as a collector. Mostly because I go back and forth on whether I consider myself a collector. I just get things that I like to play, really. But what I've seen, at least in the Instagram community, in the retro community, that it doesn't bother me, but it's just kind of, I'm not too crazy about it. It's just people that just collect expensive games just for the sake of, showing off an expensive game, even though that game may be shit. It just, to me, I see some people that the act of collecting is more about having, that valuable game rather than actually experiencing the game. And you know what? To each their own. I don't judge anybody. If that's what you like, go for it. It's just not me. That's not what I like. I like to play my games, and I'm not going to spend $2,000 on stadium events just to say I have stadium events. So that's kind of my little irk, not to call it a pet peeve. So maybe, Paul, you can tell us what you think is what annoys you.
Again, like with you, Ozzy, there's not really a heck of a lot that annoys me in collecting games. Like I'll hear people complain about the prices and so on and so forth, but look, that's the reality, supply and demand. If the supply is low and the demand is high, then the price is going to go up, and that's just kind of how it is. If I had a pet peeve, it would probably be getting something online and then it arriving not in the condition that I expected.
Yes.
I've had a few experiences with that, and hey, it's like any good corporation, I'll call it a good learning opportunity. And since then, I have learned to be a lot more careful with what I purchase online and just making sure, getting pictures. If somebody doesn't provide pictures or is reticent or whatever, forget it, move on. That great deal, there will be another one. Don't worry about it.
So Arnie, what is your pet peeve?
100% agree with Paul. My pet peeve in game collecting is the U.S. Postal Service. To make it their mission to try to any freaking package that is sent my way. But if I had to pick in terms of actually collecting games and buying games, and I don't know why, I don't mind price tag stickers, rental stickers on games. Like, if you saw my game collection, it'd probably give some people nightmares, because I essentially keep all my game price tags and stickers and nonsense on there. The one thing that does bother me, and I don't know why it bothers me, but when I get a game, and most of the games I buy are PS2 forward, but when manuals are like either ripped or stained or, just not taken care of, it really bothers me, because I'm like, you have this protector around the manual. How did you destroy the one thing that is sort of not exposed to anything? Because the game goes in the console, so I can understand how the game would get fried, and the cover art is sort of just out in the open, exposed to the elements. But the manual is, I don't get it. I don't get how people mistreat sort of manuals like that.
I'll tell you something about manuals. So I've been playing Ni no Kuni on the PS3 lately, and I've got the manual kind of sitting on a little coffee table next to the couch in the game room, and I'm a responsible adult. I don't keep coffee next to it. I don't do stupid things, but every once in a while, my dog will walk by the coffee table, and that maybe that's how something like that might happen.
That's true. I have had an experience where I found a game that somebody had essentially, it was a GameCube game, it was a Naruto game, and somebody opened it, took out the cover art, and drew mustaches in permanent on all the characters. I was like, that is some dedication to your craft right there.
So,
Because it's not like
that's awesome.
it's not like you just drew it on the front of the case, like on the plastic. You had to open it and take the cover art out, draw all this stuff on it, and slide it back.
I don't think you
in.
can even hate on that, man. I mean, I think you just have to accept that as just, art. So,
I was like, I was so tempted to buy it, but I was like, it's not even like it's not a like if it was slightly like if it was even a game I was slightly interested in, I would have absolutely bought it.
so Masa, what's your pet peeve?
Okay, so I don't really mind the price tags, except if it's like GameStop. I mean, of course, I remove their stickers. But one of the this is actually like GameStop related as well. But my biggest pet peeve is like, for example, just yesterday I went to GameStop. I was checking out the used game section, and there's like so many modern games without the original boxes, and that's always driving me insane. I was like, hey, there's this guy at 3 and this guy at 4, but they are in this like box where it's like, yeah, someone like just like wrote like this guy at 4 on it, and there's like no cover art or anything, and I'm like, what happens to these boxes? And it's even worse with like all the handheld consoles.
Yeah.
But like, I understand that back in the day, for example, almost I would say 90% of my NES, N64, Super Nintendo collection and Game Boy, it's loose games because I mean we had those cardboard boxes and I mean they would get wrecked or people would just throw them away.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't understand if you have a a 3DS game or a PS4 game, why the fuck would you throw away the box? Like, come on, like that's like fucking driving me insane whenever I see games like that.
Well, especially for Vita and like 3DS games because they barely take up any space whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean they're so small. Like if you don't keep them in the cases, like I mean you're just gonna lose the games.
And especially GameStop actually throws away. They have a policy of throwing away the cases. So I find it infuriating. So yeah, Masa, I'm gonna go with you on that. It really pisses me off. So it has been an awesome time, guys, and we hope you will tune in next time. Again, my name is Ozzy, and you can find me on Instagram under the handle Shadow the Collector, where you can read my rambling posts that have absolutely no respect whatsoever for the Instagram word limit. And how about you guys? Where can we find you?
I'm at 8-Bit Yarns, the number 8, one word. I'm on Instagram. Come check me out.
I am also on Instagram. Welcome to the game. Word welcome, number 2, the game. Again, you can come find me on Instagram. I, unlike the rest of these people, need followers and, sort of more people to listen to me to feel good about myself. So any contribution towards that is very highly appreciated.
Let's make that our New Year's resolution, guys. Masa, where can we find you?
As you guys, like I'm also on Instagram, and my name is Masa Jarvinen09. So it's MasaJarvinen09. And unlike Arnie, I don't really need more followers.
Have you?
Yeah, I'm Instagram famous, baby.
So thank you, guys. This has been the Region Free Gamers podcast. It's been an awesome time. You can find us everywhere that good podcasts can be found. We're now on iTunes, so make sure if you have some time and if you like what you heard, just leave us a review. It helps us quite a lot. We really want to know how we're doing. You can also follow us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers. That's exactly how that's spelled, where you can leave us feedback and you can tell us how we're doing and what you think of us and the podcast. So until next time, just make sure to keep your knuckles bare and your fights final.